The apartment breathed with silence, the kind that pressed against the walls and made the air feel heavier than it should. On Portland's industrial edge, the streets outside had gone gray with frost, trucks hissing as they rolled past in the distance, but inside, the cold was sharper. The heater had given out days ago, leaving the rooms to trap only damp air and the faint metallic tang of mildew. Condensation streaked the windows like tired tears, and every surface carried a thin sheen of neglect. Ella and Emma sat on the floor, knees folded beneath them, leaning into each other the way small birds might huddle against the wind. Their stomachs gnawed, dull at first and then sharper, until it seemed their bodies were made of nothing but ache. The yellow shirts they had once been proud of now clung to them limply, stained and tired. The black skirts, chosen by their mother for school, looked absurd in this place, as if they belonged to some other life, in which the girls had more than cereal and silence. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, a hollow lie of plenty. Inside was almost nothing: a bottle of water, a streaked bottle of ketchup, the smell of cold emptiness. The crackers that had seemed like salvation were gone now. The crumbs pressed into the linoleum beneath their fingers when they had fought over the last ones. 2 days ago. At first, they had believed. Sarah always came back. She left that night in her coat, hair pulled back too quickly, muttering something about medicine. Her face had looked pale, but they didn't ask questions. They were children, and mothers were supposed to be stronger than the shadows they disappeared into. But the hours stretched, and then the days. And now the girls knew only the rhythm of waiting, crying, whispering their mother's name into the dark. On the first night, they sat at the window, noses pressed against the glass, certain she'd appear under the streetlight. On the second, they curled into the couch cushions and sobbed until sleep dragged them down. On the third, Ella wiped her sleeve across her nose, eyes red but focused, and said something Emma had never expected. "Let's call someone." Emma blinked at her, raw-voiced. "Who?" "I don't know," Ella whispered, her jaw set in that strange, too-grown way that made her look like someone older, wearing a child's skin. "Just someone." The phone was nearly dead, its battery blinking its last warning like a heartbeat fading. Their mother's number led only to voicemail. The emergency line hovered in their thoughts, too big, too dangerous. What if it meant being pulled apart, sent to strangers? They couldn't risk that. So Ella tapped her small fingers against the keypad, punching a number she didn't know why she chose. She pressed call. The silence stretched, then a ring. 1, 2, 3. Emma held her breath, eyes wide. "Hello?" The voice came, deep and clean, edged with impatience. Ella froze, searching the dim apartment for words. They weren't there, not in the corners, not under the hum of the refrigerator. Only hunger filled her, and it carried her voice out of her like something escaping. "We're hungry," she whispered. The line went still. No shuffling, no breathing, just silence. So long Ella thought maybe the call had broken. She pulled the phone back, looked at the screen. Still connected, across the city, Andrew Caldwell sat behind a desk of black glass. A skyline spread beneath his windows like a kingdom. He had been reviewing figures, signatures, preparing for another late-night meeting. The call had startled him. His private line rarely rang. He almost ignored it, but habit and authority made him answer. What he heard was not business, not power, not the clipped words of a deal. It was a voice so soft it barely existed. A child's voice edged with exhaustion. No child should know. For a moment, he thought it was a mistake, or worse, some twisted scheme. The city was full of cons, but the words clung to him, echoing in places of his mind he thought long sealed off. Hungry. A child saying it as if it were a confession, not a demand. Andrew sat back in his chair, the numbers on his screen blurring. He tried to dismiss it, tried to clear the strangeness from his head. Yet the sound of that voice, the sincerity of it, gnawed at him. He opened his system, traced the incoming call, his fingers moving before his mind decided. Whoever they were, wherever they were, he couldn't shake the certainty this was not something he could let go. Asterisk. The city looked different from the top floor of Caldwell Tower. Below, the traffic hummed like machinery, lights blinking and shifting in patterns that had nothing to do with hunger, nothing to do with loneliness. Andrew Caldwell leaned back in his chair, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, the blue glow of his monitor stretching across the room. He had worked himself into this empire brick by brick, clawing through boardrooms, silencing rivals with contracts and lawsuits. People said he had a mind like a steel trap and a heart made of the same. But tonight, the trap had caused something unexpected. The voice. It replayed in his head. a phantom echo against the silence of his office. "We're hungry." He tried to bury it under quarterly reports, under the drone of a video conference, under the sharp words of lawyers who demanded his signature on an acquisition. But the words would not be silenced. He poured the whiskey, but it burned in his throat without warmth. He set it down, restless, pacing across the polished floor toward the window. He had once believed money bought distance from everything raw and fragile. Yet here was a stranger's hunger, carried over invisible wires. Breaking into his fortress of glass and steel. His assistant buzzed in. "Sir, the Singapore partners are waiting." "Do you want me to cancel it?" Andrew snapped, sharper than he intended. He caught himself, voice softer. "Reschedule." There was silence, then a hesitant, "Of course." "Mr. Caldwell." The room dimmed again, leaving only the glow of the skyline and the faint reflection of a man who suddenly looked older than his years. Andrew sat down again, his hand hovering over the keyboard. Logic told him to let it go. Children prank called strangers every day. Yet instinct, honed from decades of reading people, told him this was not a prank. That voice had not been laughing. It had been breaking. He opened a secure system few people in his company knew existed. A network of tools he kept for personal leverage. He keyed in the number, watching as it began to trace its path backward. Every step deeper made him more certain he was doing something he shouldn't, yet he couldn't stop. The signal narrowed to Portland's industrial district. Not a home he recognized, not a place he had reason to be. He zoomed in, saw crisscrossing alleys, rusted warehouses. Housing blocks slumped against one another like weary men. He frowned. That part of the city was foreign to him, though he had built factories not far from it years ago. He leaned back, unease rising. Portland was his city. His empire had roots here. Yet he could not picture the faces who lived in that building. The voices that whispered inside those walls. For the first time in years, he felt blind. He called his head of security. The man answered groggy, surprised by the late hour. "Sir?" "There was a call," Andrew said, choosing his words carefully. "Trace this number." He gave it. "Don't ask questions. Just find me everything. Who's there? Who owns the unit? Who pays the bills? I want it discreet." "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. We'll run it now." Andrew ended the call, his hand trembling slightly against the glass of the whiskey. He didn't drink it. He pressed his fingers to his temples instead, trying to massage away the unease that coiled through him. He had spent his life building walls. His childhood had taught him to. A mother who had vanished too soon, a father whose anger had been the only constant. He had sworn never to need anyone, never to feel the sting of absence. Now, decades later, a child's plea had cracked those walls in an instant. Across the city, the apartment sat in shadow, but he could see it in his mind, could hear the small voice again, wavering, unsure. The hunger in it wasn't just for food, it was for someone, anyone, to answer. The phone buzzed again. His security chief's voice was clipped. "We found the location. Apartment complex, Unit 3B, records are patchy, late rent, utilities barely paid. Occupant listed as Sarah Connolly. Single mother. No emergency contacts." The name hit him like cold water. Sarah Connolly. The syllables unlocked the door in his memory he had long bolted shut. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened. He forced air into his lungs, forced words past the sudden rush in his head. "Keep watching the place," he said. "No one in or out without my knowledge." "Yes, sir." Asterisk the line cut. Andrew set the phone down slowly, his reflection staring back at him in the glass of his desk. Sarah. He hadn't heard that name in years. She had been a fleeting chapter, someone he had pushed out of his mind in his climb toward power. He had not thought of her since, but now her name stood in front of him again, carrying the weight of two small voices. His hands curled into fists. What if those girls, hungry, cold, desperate, were tied to Sarah? What if the randomness of that call wasn't random at all? He looked out at the city again, but it no longer looked like a kingdom. It looked like a maze, and somewhere inside it were two children he could not unhear. Somewhere inside it was a woman from his past, and secrets he had never asked to meet again, and yet he knew he would go. Asterisk. The apartment had grown colder still, as if the walls themselves were breathing out the night. Shadows pulled in the corners, stretching longer with each flicker of the street lamp outside. Ella sat with her arms wrapped around Emma, their bones pressing into each other like fragile sticks. The silence pressed and heavy. broken only by the occasional groan of the pipes or the distant cough of a neighbor. Through the thin walls, they had learned to keep their voices low. Noise carried in this building, and noise attracted attention. The woman downstairs with the cigarettes and an angry boyfriend didn't like children. The landlord didn't like late rent. Strangers with badges sometimes came when kids were left alone. And the twins had heard enough whispers in the hall to know what happened next. Separation. They couldn't let that happen. Ella tried to be brave. She always tried. Her mother had told her, once you're the older one, by 3 minutes, protect your sister. Ella wore those words like armor, but the armor was cracking now. Hunger made her dizzy, made her hands tremble when she reached for the phone earlier. Still, she had dialed, and still, a man had answered. His voice was sharp, startled. She hadn't known what else to say but the truth. We're hungry. The phone had died minutes after. Its screen now lay black on the counter, lifeless as another body in the room. Ella wished she'd said more, told him their names, told him their mother was missing. But she hadn't. She had whispered the words, and then silence had swallowed her. Now the room felt darker than before, heavier, as if waiting for something to happen. Emma stirred beside her, restless in sleep. She whimpered, a small sound that made Ella's chest hurt. Ella brushed her sister's tangled hair back, whispering, "It's okay. I'm here." Though she didn't know if it was true, then came the noises die first. It was nothing, just the creak of footsteps overhead, the slam of a door down the hall. But then came a sound closer, the scrape of something against the hallway floor. A pause, another scrape. Ella's stomach tightened. She looked toward the door, the lock nothing more than a tarnished knob and a thin chain. She pulled Emma closer, listening, her breath shallow. The footsteps stopped directly outside. Silence. Then, a soft knock. Ella froze. Her mind raced. Their mother never knocked. She had keys. She always used them. The knock came again, louder this time. Emma stirred awake, blinking in confusion. "Mom?" She whispered hopefully. Ella shook her head, finger pressed to her lips. Her heart hammered so loudly she thought whoever was outside might hear it. "Hello." A man's voice. Not their mother. Not anyone they recognized. Emma whimpered again, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. Ella's throat went dry. She didn't answer. The doorknob rattled lightly. Not enough to force it, but enough to test. Then silence again. The seconds stretched, thick and endless. Ella counted them in her head, willing them to pass faster, willing the footsteps to retreat. But instead, the voice came again, softer now, almost coaxing. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." Every instinct screamed at Ella not to believe it. Adults who said it's okay usually meant it wasn't. She held Emma tighter, whispering into her hair, "Don't say anything. Don't move." The silence stretched on. Then, finally, footsteps moved away. A door closed somewhere down the hall. Relief didn't come. Suspicion sat heavier than fear. Ella stared at the dead phone on the counter. Whoever had knocked, how had they known? Could it be the man she'd call? Or someone worse? Emma's small voice broke the silence. What if it was someone who wanted to help? Ella didn't answer, because she didn't know. Because sometimes the people who said they wanted to help were the ones who broke families apart. She guided Emma back toward the couch, pulling the thin blanket over both of them. Emma's eyes fluttered shut again, quickly, exhaustion stronger than fear. But Ella stayed awake. She stared at the door, every creak in the building magnified in her mind. Hours blurred. Somewhere deep in the night, another sound came, not from the hallway this time, but from outside. A car engine idling. Headlights swept briefly through the frosted window, cutting across the walls. Then darkness again. Ella pressed her face into Emma's hair, breathing in her warmth, whispering again, "It's okay. I'm here." She wasn't sure if she was speaking to her sister or to herself, and outside, watching from the shadows of the street, a man sat in the back of a sleek black car, staring at the building. Andrew Caldwell's world of skyscrapers and contracts had brought him here, to this rusted edge of Portland. He hadn't stepped out yet. He hadn't knocked again. For now, he only watched, the girl's whispered words echoing in him like a curse. The car idled in the shadow of a leaning street light, its engine a low hum against the sleeping city. Andrew Caldwell sat in the back seat, one hand pressed to his jaw, eyes fixed on the rundown apartment block across the street. The windows were fogged from the inside, lit faintly by the dull orange glow of a single street lamp. The building looked tired, its bricks crumbling in places, graffiti curling across the lower walls like scars. His driver shifted uneasily in the front seat. "Sir, this isn't a good neighborhood. We should stay put," Andrew cut in, his tone clipped. His eyes never left the building. "No one moves until I say." The driver hesitated, then nodded. Andrew returned his gaze to the building, his chest tightening. He had stared down investors worth billions, dismantled companies like they were toys, but tonight, with only shadows and silence before him, he felt unsettled in a way he hadn't since his youth. That voice echoed again in his mind. "We're hungry." He opened the door before he could change his mind. The night air cut sharp and damp against his face. The smell of oil and wet asphalt heavy in his lungs. Each step across the cracked pavement felt deliberate, too loud, echoing off the empty street. He stopped at the building's entrance, a rusted door hanging slightly crooked on its hinges, and pushed inside. The hallway reeked of stale smoke, boiled cabbage, and something sour beneath it all. Light bulbs buzzed overhead, one flickering weakly, throwing the corridor into spasms of shadow and light. And Rue's polished shoes clicked against the linoleum. "To clean. To far in here. Unit 3B. He repeated it in his head like a mantra. He found the door easily. It was thin, the paint peeling, the lock no sturdier than a child's toy. He raised his hand, hesitated, then knocked. Inside, silence stretched. He imagined the children huddled close, listening. He knocked again, softer. "Hello?" His voice echoed awkwardly down the hallway. "It's all right. I just want to talk." Nothing. No answer. He exhaled, frustration and doubt tangling in his chest. Perhaps this was a mistake. Perhaps he had been played, manipulated by some scam he hadn't yet recognized. But his instincts wouldn't let him leave. He knocked once more, lower, quieter, leaning close to the door. "Please, I know you're in there." A scrape sounded inside. Movement. Then stillness again. He closed his eyes briefly. Someone was listening. The silence stretched so long he thought they would never answer. Then so faint he almost missed it. Footsteps padded across the floor. A pause at the door. He could almost feel the small body standing there on the other side, listening. "I heard your call," Andrew said softly. His own voice surprised him. It was gentler than he had intended, stripped of its usual sharp edges. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you." Still no response. He straightened, trying another approach. "Is your mother home?" The silence was heavier now, as though the air itself resisted the question. He knew the answer already. Finally, a voice came, tiny, cautious. It was Ella. She left. Andrew's breath caught. So it was true. He pressed his palm lightly against the door, as if he could bridge the space through wood and metal. "And she hasn't come back?" "No." Her voice cracked. Then, fiercer, "We don't want to be taken away." The words hit him like a blow. He could picture them to fragile figures curled together in the dark, terrified not just of hunger, but of losing each other. Andrew cleared his throat, his voice firm, but softer now, the way he might speak to a frightened animal. "No one's taking you anywhere. Not if I can help it." Another pause. He heard a muffled whisper, Emma's voice this time, though he couldn't make out the words. Then Ella again, sharper, braver. "Who are you?" The question silenced him. Who was he, really? A name on skyscrapers, a signature on contracts. A man who had traded pieces of himself for power until there was little left. And now, here he stood outside a door, trying to convince the children he was worth trusting. "My name is Andrew," he said finally. Andrew Caldwell. He heard a faint intake of breath from the other side, as though the name meant something. Perhaps Sarah had mentioned him. Perhaps not. He didn't ask. Not yet. The chain on the door rattled faintly, as though tested but not undone. A single eye peered through the crack as the door opened a fraction. Blue, large, tired. A child's eye. Andrew swallowed hard. "Ella." He guessed. The eye blinked once, then narrowed. "How do you know my name?" He froze. He hadn't meant to speak it, hadn't even realized he knew. But he did. Somewhere, buried in the recesses of his memory, Sarah's voice had said it once. In a long-ago conversation he hadn't thought mattered. He faltered. It had been years since words failed him. "I think I knew your mother." The door slammed shut again, the chain rattling loud in the silence. He heard Emma's muffled voice, frightened now, and Ella's whisper, urgent and sharp. Andrew stepped back, guilt and urgency clawing at him. He had said too much, too soon. But he could not leave now. Not after seeing that eye, not after hearing that small voice. He straightened. the steel of the CEO bleeding back into his stance. Though his chest still ached with something far less familiar. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, his voice steady through the door. "I'll bring food, warm food, and I'll wait until you open the door. You don't have to trust me yet, but I'll be here." Silence. Only the faint sound of breathing on the other side. Andrew lingered a moment longer, then turned, walking back down the dim hallway. His footsteps echoed like promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Behind the door, Ella pressed her forehead against the wood, clutching Emma's hand. She didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but something in his voice had sounded different from the others they feared. Something almost like truth. The morning broke pale and gray, a thin veil of light filtering through the clouds that clung low over Portland. Andrew Caldwell had not slept. His penthouse apartment, usually a sanctuary of silence and glass, felt like a cage that night. He had paced between the floor-to-ceiling windows and the gleaming black counters, the name Sarah Connolly repeating in his head like an unwelcome refrain. Sarah. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in over a decade. She had been a shadow from the years before Caldwell Tower, before billion-dollar deals and his face in the Wall Street Journal. Back then, he was ambitious, but not yet untouchable. A man climbing his way up and shedding people along the climb. Sarah had been part of that shedding. He poured coffee he didn't want, staring down into the dark liquid as if it might offer answers. The memory that returned wasn't sharp, not precise, but blurred around the edges. Sarah's laugh in a bar to dim for comfort, her hair falling across her face as she told him she wanted more out of life. Then clocking hours at the front desk. They had spent nights together, a brief collision of hunger and loneliness. But Andrew had left her behind when his career demanded it. She had not asked for anything, and he had not looked back. Until now, the sound of those children's voices, the names Ella and Emma slipping from his own lips as if they had always been there, cracked something he had believed unshakable. He needed answers. By noon, his head of security slid a file across his desk. Andrew sat rigid as he opened it, scanning the papers inside. Sarah Connolly, 38. Employment history scattered waitressing, retail, short-term office assistant jobs. No stable career. A few medical visits noted, but nothing detailed. No listed relatives in Portland. Address, Unit 3B, Industrial District. Rent overdue by 3 months. Utilities near shut-off. Children, 2. Ella and Emma Connolly, twins, 6 years old. Andrew's jaw tightened. He turned the page and stopped. A photograph paperclip to the corner stared back at him. Sarah, thinner now, her hair longer, her smile forced for the DMV camera. The eyes, though there was no mistaking them, they were the same blue that had peered at him through the crack in that door. He closed the file slowly, pressing his hand flat against the desk to steady himself. He wanted to feel fury at her silence, at the burden she had left, but all he felt was a hollow ache that threatened to undo him. The intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice was hesitant. "Mr. Caldwell, you're 3 o'clock with the expansion team. Cancel it," Andrew said, voice low but firm. "Sir, that's cancel it." There was no negotiation in his tone. He grabbed his coat and the file, the glass towers of his empire shrinking behind him as he drove once again toward the industrial edge of the city. The girls had not moved much from the couch that morning. Emma was curled under the blanket, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, while Ella sat upright, her eyes locked on the door as if daring it to betray them again. Her stomach hurt worse than yesterday. She tried to distract herself by humming softly, a tune she remembered their mother singing once. Emma stirred and whispered, "Do you think Mom will come back today?" Ella's throat closed. She wanted to say yes, wanted to give Emma something to cling to, but lying felt heavier than silence. So she said nothing. When the knock came again, both girls jumped. Emma's eyes lit up, hopeful. Ella's narrowed, wary. "It's him," Ella whispered. They listened. The knock was softer this time. Then the voice, "It's Andrew. I brought food." Emma tugged at Ella's arm. "Please," she whispered. "I'm so hungry." Ella bit her lip, torn between fear and need. Finally, she slid off the couch, moving to the door. She didn't open it, but she pressed her face against the wood. "Leave it outside," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. There was a pause, then the scrape of something against the floor. "All right," Andrew said. "It's just a bag. I'll step back." Ella waited, ears straining. She heard footsteps retreat. She counted to 20 before daring to slide the chain and crack the door. A paper bag sat in the hall, warm steam rising faintly from the top. She snatched it quickly, closing the door again with a snap. Inside, Emma was already sitting up, her eyes wide. Ella opened the bag. The smell hit them first. Real food, hot, rich, filling the apartment with a scent that made their stomachs twist painfully. There were sandwiches, fruit, even small cartons of milk. Emma nearly cried as she bit into the first sandwich. Ella forced herself to eat slower, though the taste almost undid her. She kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it didn't. Outside, Andrew remained in the hall, leaning against the opposite wall, listening to the faint rustle of wrappers, the muffled sound of children finally eating. Something inside him broke further at that sound, something he hadn't known was fragile. Later, when the bag was empty and Emma had drifted into food-heavy sleep, Ella crept back to the door. She pressed her lips near the wood and whispered, "Why are you here?" Andrew, still leaning against the wall, closed his eyes at the question. His answer was quiet, almost to himself. "Because I should have been, long ago." She didn't reply, but she didn't tell him to leave, either. That night, Andrew sat in his penthouse again, the city glowing outside, the file open before him. He flipped once more to Sarah's photograph, tracing the outline of her face with his eyes. Questions gnawed at him. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she hidden the girls? And why had fate dragged him back to them now? He reached for the phone, calling his head of security again. "I want every piece of information on Sarah Connolly. Where she worked, who she knew, medical records, debts, everything." "Dig deeper?" "Yes, sir. But what are you expecting to find?" Andrew hesitated, staring at the photo of the twins' mother. "The truth," he said finally. And for the first time in years, Andrew Caldwell, the man who believed in control, in precision. And Walls realized he was stepping into something far messier, far more dangerous. A past he had buried, a future he hadn't asked for. Somewhere between the two, the hungry voices had found him, and he could no longer pretend he didn't hear them. The city was restless that night, though in Andrew Caldwell's penthouse there was nothing but silence. He stood before the windows, his reflection fractured against the glittering skyline. A man carved out of glass and steel, who suddenly felt made of bone and uncertainty. On the desk behind him lay the envelopes, one sealed, one open. The open file held everything his people had dug up about Sarah Connolly: rent receipts, scrawled with late fees, medical bills stamped unpaid, scraps of employment history stitched together by survival. The sealed envelope was thinner, lighter, but heavier than anything else in the room. DNA results. He hadn't opened it yet. His hand had hovered over the flap for hours, retreating each time. Andrew Caldwell had built an empire on facts, on knowing outcomes before they happened. But tonight the truth felt like a blade. If he opened it, he could never go back. He poured whiskey into a glass, though he didn't drink it. His phone buzzed. He let it ring. Then, slowly, he turned toward the desk and sat. Not yet. He wasn't ready. Instead, his mind wandered back to the apartment. The girls had eaten every scrap of food he left that afternoon. He had lingered in the hall longer than necessary, listening to the soft crinkle of wrappers, the muffled sound of chewing, even a stifled giggle that broke through the silence for the first time. He had wanted to knock again, to say more, but instinct told him to leave space. Trust wasn't built overnight, yet the image haunted him, to fragile bodies in a freezing apartment, abandoned by the one person meant to protect them. He had tasted hunger before, long ago, though he'd buried those memories beneath wealth and power. But hunger in a child's voice, it was something else entirely. The next day, Andrew didn't send security or assistance. He went himself. The black car pulled up to the building again, its sleek surface out of place against rust and graffiti. He carried another bag, heavier this time. Soup, bread, fruit, cartons of milk. He knocked. Silence. Then, footsteps, small ones. The chain rattled. The door opened a crack. Blue eyes again. This time the sets, stacked above each other in the sliver of light. Ella in front, Emma peeking from behind. Andrew crouched slightly, lowering his gaze to their level. "I brought food," he said. "And blankets." Ella studied him carefully, her face discarded for 6 years old. "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because you need it, and because no one else seems to be giving it." She hesitated, then reached through the crack, grabbing the bag quickly. Retreating like a small animal into the shadows, the door slammed shut again. He heard the shuffle of feet, the scrape of chairs dragged closer, the sounds of unpacking. Then Emma's voice, higher, Softer. It's warm, and Rue's chest tightened. He sat down on the cold hallway floor, leaning his back against the wall beside their door. He stayed there, listening, not intruding, just present. After a long while, Ella's voice came through the wood. "What do you want from us?" The question stunned him. It wasn't spoken with curiosity, but suspicion, the awareness of someone too young to know betrayal, but already bracing for it. And Drew answered honestly, "I don't know." He said quietly, "Maybe I just don't want you to be hungry anymore." Silence followed. Then, faintly, Emma giggled again, this time not muffled. It was the smallest crack in the wall between them. Back in his penthouse, Andrew stared again at the unopened envelope. He told himself he was imagining things, but the resemblance, the blue eyes, the name Sarah, the dates, they lined up to perfectly. He thought of Sarah's laughter years ago, of the way she'd left without goodbye, of how he'd never asked where she went. Could she have been carrying this secret all along? His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. His head of security spoke briskly. "Sir, about Sarah Connolly, we found something. Hospital records she was admitted 6 months ago for recurring migraines. Tests suggested something more serious, neurological, but she never followed up. Bills unpaid." Andrew closed his eyes, his chest heavy. Migraines. The word Sarah had muttered the night she disappeared. Medicine. She may be in real danger. The man continued. "We're trying to track her now, but so far nothing." Andrew hung up without replying. He turned back to the envelope, his pulse unsteady. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Ella spread the new blanket over Emma. The warmth was instant, soothing. Emma snuggled into it, whispering, "Do you think he'll come back again?" Ella frowned. "I don't know. But he brought food, real food." Ella didn't answer. Trust was a luxury, but in the corner of her chest, a fragile hope stirred, no matter how hard she tried to smother it. By midnight, Andrew sat once more at his desk, the city glowing like embers beyond the glass. He could no longer wait, with hands steadier than he felt. He slid a letter opener beneath the flap of the envelope and tore it clean. The paper inside was short, clinical. He read it once, then again, the words sinking deeper with each pass. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The room swayed around him. He set the paper down carefully, his fingers trembling. He had known, deep down, but seeing it confirmed the weight of it pressed against his ribs, stealing his breath. The twins, Ella and Emma, they weren't just Sarah's children, they were his. The whiskey glass sat untouched as he stared into the darkness. His life had been built on control, on numbers, on certainty, but 2 children had slipped past all of it, carrying his blood, his eyes, his name he had never given them. For the first time in years, Andrew Caldwell felt something colder than fear. He felt responsibility. He felt the shape of his empire collapse around the whisper of 2 small voices in the dark. "We're hungry." The words weren't just theirs anymore. They were his burden, his truth, and he knew he could never walk away. Asterisk, the envelope lay open on Andrew's desk, its single sheet of verdict he could not unread. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. He sat in silence long after the city had gone to sleep, long after even the restless hum of traffic seemed to fade. The truth had weight. It pressed down on his shoulders, grinding against the armor of a man who had believed himself untouchable. Andrew Caldwell, who built towers of steel and glass, now felt the foundation of his life tilt under the fragile voices of 2 hungry children. The phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't his assistant or security chief. It was the hospital. His security team had managed to locate Sarah. "Mr. Caldwell?" The doctor's voice was low, professional, carrying the careful tone reserved for bad news. "She was admitted 2 days ago. Found collapsed near a bus stop. Severe neurological complications. It's late stage. I'm sorry." Andrew's throat closed. He forced words out. "Is she?" "She's alive," the doctor interrupted. "For now. But it's terminal. Weeks, maybe days." The line went quiet. Andrew gripped the desk so hard his knuckles blanched. He had prepared for mergers, for lawsuits, for global crises, but not this. Not the return of a ghost, dying, leaving behind proof of his own blind choices. He whispered, almost to himself, "She left them alone. She couldn't help it." The doctor said gently, "By the time she collapsed, she was already disoriented. She likely didn't know where she was going." Andrew ended the call, his chest hollowed by something sharp and unrelenting. He couldn't sit still. He grabbed his coat, the DNA report shoved into his pocket like a brand. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow, and Ruth's shoes echoed down the corridor, too loud. The polish for a place where everything seemed frayed. Nurses glanced at him, then away again, as though they sensed he wasn't here to play the role of Paula's CEO, but something rawer. A finished dot, he stopped at the doorway. Sarah lay small against the bed, tubes curling from her arms, her hair thinner than he remembered, her skin pale against the sheets. Time had etched itself into her face, but even through the illness, he recognized her, and suddenly, the years between them collapsed. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded them. Then recognition, her lips moved, cracked and dry. Andrew? He stepped closer, words failing him. She gave a faint, tired smile. You came. His jaw tightened. You should have told me. Her eyes closed briefly, tears pressing at the corners. I wanted to, 100 times. But I knew what you were chasing. You wouldn't have stayed, and I couldn't. She coughed, her voice fracturing. I couldn't let them feel unwanted. They're mine, Andrew said, the words strange in his mouth. He pulled the DNA paper from his pocket and laid it on the table, beside her. I know. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for his. They're good girls, strong, smarter than me. Promise me, Andrew. Promise you won't let them be swallowed by the system. Promise you'll keep them together. His throat ached. He clasped her hand, for once not as a deal-maker, not as a man in control, but as someone terrified of failing. I promise. Her breath rattled, uneven. She gave a weak nod. There's a letter for you in the drawer. He opened the bedside drawer and found it. An envelope, his name scrawled across it in Sarah's faded handwriting. He held it, but didn't open it, not yet. He couldn't bear her voice to end an ink dot by morning. She was gone. The funeral was small, anonymous. Andrew made sure of it. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, the gray sky pressing low, the cold biting through his coat. No reporters, no colleagues, just him, the wind, and the silence of a woman who had carried his secret for 6 years. He returned to the car, the letter still unopened in his pocket. Asterisk at the apartment. The girls waited. Ella had not slept. She had kept the blanket wrapped tightly around Emma, listening for every sound in the hallway, every footstep that might signal his return or their mother's. But their mother never came. When the knock finally came, Ella's heart lurched. She approached cautiously, pressing her ear to the wood. It's me, Andrew said. His voice was low. Tired, please. Open the door. Ella hesitated, then slid the chain, opening the door just enough to see him. He looked different today, less polished, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, and in his hand, he held a folded piece of paper. Where's Mom? Emma asked, appearing behind Ella, her voice hopeful, and Ruth's chest tightened. He crouched down, meeting their eyes. Your mom. She was very sick. She's not coming back. Emma's face crumpled. She clung to Ella, sobbing into her sister's shoulder. Ella's jaw trembled, but her eyes stayed sharp, blue and unyielding. Are you lying? No. His voice cracked. I wish I was. Asterisk. The girls clung together, their small bodies trembling. Andrew wanted to reach for them, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he sat on the floor in the hallway, his back against the wall, waiting for their storm of grief to break. Finally, when the sobs turned to hiccups, he spoke again. She left something for you, for us. He unfolded the letter, his hands unsteady, and began to read. Andrew, if you're holding this, then I failed them. I tried to protect them from a world I didn't think you had space for. But fate doesn't care about my plans. These are your daughters. They have your eyes, your stubbornness, your fire. They need more than I could give. Keep them together. Show them they were wanted all along, even if I was too afraid to let them see it. His voice broke on the last line. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the floor, sliding it gently through the crack. Ella stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. She read the scrawled handwriting slowly, her lips moving as she traced each word. When she finished, she pressed the paper to her chest. Finally, she opened the door wider. Asterisk. Andrew looked up at them, the small figures framed in the doorway of a dying apartment. They were fragile, uncertain, and his Emma sniffled. You're really our dad? Andrew nodded, his voice raw. Yes, I am. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then Emma stepped forward, small hands reaching out uncertainly. Andrew opened his arms. She ran into them, clinging tight, her sobs muffled against his chest. Ella lingered at the threshold, torn between fear and longing. Andrew met her gaze, his own eyes wet. "I promised your mom I'd keep you together. I don't break promises." Something shifted in her expression, still guarded, but softer now. She stepped forward, her hand slipping into his. Andrew Caldwell, the man who had commanded empires, who had once believed himself above the fragility of human need, knelt there in a crumbling hallway with 2 children pressed against him. And for the first time in years, he wept not for loss, not for empire, but for the terrifying, miraculous gain of family. The city outside hummed on, indifferent. But in that hallway, everything had changed.